Hello to everyone, and welcome to the second talk of a series of thematic conversations in the context of New Artist Works 2026. The exhibition is currently on at the International Centre for the Image, organized by PhotoIreland, with the kind support of the Arts Council of Ireland. Through the talk series, we aim to tease out the work and practice of the 10 participant artists. And it's worth noting that New Artist Works is a triennial project by PhotoIreland, now in its fifth edition, that aims to represent the growing diversity of contemporary photographic practices in Ireland. You can find out more about the artists, the projects, and the issues discussed in this series online at image.museum. We continue the talk series with a conversation entitled On Looking, with artists Miriam O'Connor, Dorje de Burgh, and Ciara Richardson, reflecting on acts of looking and the politics of visibility and surveillance through their practice. Now, unfortunately, today Ciara cannot be with us, so I want to read a text to contextualize the work of Ciara Richardson. She states that her practice begins with experimentation through testing, making, and doing. I observe everyday objects and subjects closely, exploring them beyond their surface appearance. Through careful analysis, I investigate their expressive potential and underlying mechanics, searching for the most meaningful way to communicate these ideas visually. My interest in visual methodology and semiotics extends beyond simply creating a relationship between the viewer and the object. It is about questioning how meaning is constructed through the act of looking itself. One example of this is my installation, How Would You Like It to Happen to You? This ongoing body of work explores materiality and visual communication as ways of engaging with gender stereotypes and challenging traditional representations of the male gaze. The project began with the iconic image of Marilyn Monroe's dress blowing upwards, a photograph that has become deeply embedded in popular culture. I wanted to reverse this familiar narrative. Instead of men looking at women, I invite women to look at men. To do this, I photograph classic marble statues, flattening them into horizontal photographic images and placing them in a vulnerable position. The viewer's perspective is transformed through sculptural and kinetic elements, with women's eyes represented as three-dimensional objects that provoke a conversation around power, vulnerability, and the politics of looking. This work is heavily influenced by John Berger's ways of seeing. Through the New Artist Works program, I hope to continue developing this body of work by exploring new mechanical and kinetic approaches to visual storytelling. My aim is to create work that not only invites viewers to participate physically, but also challenges ideas, conventional ideas of photography, encouraging new ways of observing, experiencing, and understanding the image. Okay, it's a pity that Ciara cannot be with us today, but I'm sure some of the ideas that she's discussing will come back to us through the work of Miriam and Dorje. I invite now Miriam to proceed with her presentation.
Hi, thank you to all the attendees and for those looking in. Just a little bit about my practice and who I am. So I'm a Cork-based photographic artist working with still images, text and printed matter. In my practice, I'm curious about the multifaceted roles photography occupies in culture and the manner in which this persuasive medium permeates the way we encounter the world around us. I employ photography in conceptual, playful, and inquisitive ways, and my projects regularly acknowledge the complexities and limitations of the medium that communicate my ideas. Following my relocation to the family farm in recent years, I occupy a dual role of artist and farmer, and I'm interested in engaging with the elasticity and functionality of photography through everyday agricultural life. In attending to my day-to-day farming task, I often wonder what should photography do, or how, like other things on the farm, could it be put to work in meaningful ways. More recently, as a full-time carer for my mom and with less time available to attribute to our practice and to make work, I enlisted a wildlife camera to automatically generate photographs for me on the farm at night that I had no time to make myself. And the title of that project is Fox Equals Cow. What began as a practical solution to personal circumstances has evolved into an exploration of care, labour and technology. So that's kind of a little quick intro into the work. The project has a number of elements. It includes photographs and text works, and I'm hoping that throughout the presentation we get an opportunity to think about those things. The text works vary from a 3-stanza poem to individual sentences, lists, kind of odd stories. Some of these texts are unfinished and others are reworked over and over again. In many ways, part of the work is interested in the idea of an unfinished artwork or an artwork that doesn't necessarily have a specific beginning or end. And almost celebrates the idea of something that might be unfinished. So maybe that makes a bit more sense when I'm going through it. So I'm going to begin thinking about the theme of the talk, about surveillance and about looking, and in particular looking at our own farm maps. And you can see there's a number of different maps I've outlined here, which are maps dating back to the 60s. And in the image to the right is more in the 70s or 80s. And as time has gone on, the maps associated with our farm have become digitized, and they're satellite maps, and more you can see very specifically what's happening on the ground, and what is happening, how the land is been shifted and altered and changed by virtue of human presence and animal presence, and flora and fauna. I wanted to just draw attention to where I am. So we are here, if you can see my cursor around here, and we zoom in on that, and here I am in the studio. And actually it's kind of interesting because in this farm map that I have, my studio isn't in it. It's not on the farm map. I must go and have a look on our agricultural online to see if the maps have been updated. The maps get updated quite a bit, maybe every 5 or 10 years. So it's quite possible by now the studio is actually on that map. In any case, I wanted to just write a few notes here to speak about the idea of the farm map, revealing certain kinds of information and often concealing much more information. And in thinking about, this talk and my project, I'm thinking about what happens when the direction of surveillance looks inwards towards everyday rituals and rhythms of day-to-day life, and in doing so animates the farm in new kinds of ways. And what might be the circumstances or context that would warrant such an inquiry? And I spoke earlier in the presentation about the idea that in recent years I have become a full-time carer for my mum, and my opportunities to sustain my art practice and to make work have been compromised by my responsibilities and time being taken up in different kinds of ways. So one of the kind of solutions to this problem of time was to use a wildlife camera. You can see it here on the image on the left. It's attached to a stake. And for interest, and this particular image is actually taken, if you can see the cursor where my cursor is, it's taken, the camera is around this aspect of the field or this area of the field. So I began this work in late 2022, 2023, as a kind of solution to my problems of not having enough time to make work. And actually that kind of also that concern, or that one has as an artist, about not producing work, and what does that mean for sustaining your art practice? What does that look like? The image to the right, the map to the right, shows some of the areas where the images have been created. And just for those who are not familiar, the wildlife camera works in such a way that images are generated automatically when movement is detected by the camera, such as my comings and going, in terms of putting up the camera, collecting the camera, and indeed the animals on the farm at night, and any other kinds of events. Weather events can also determine photographs to be produced. I just thought I would put in this very first photograph, very complimentary photograph of me. It's one of the first kind of folders of photographs that I produced in 2020, early 2023. So there's a lot of photographs of me in the work that looks a bit like this, and are what we might deem as not really that interesting or useful, or lacking information, or context even. And this is quite a regular occurrence with many of the images that the camera will produce. It has a capacity to be like quite glitchy, a little bit moody, and will, repeat itself over and over again. It's set up in such a way that there are 3 images generated for every 1 second of movement. So you can imagine if there is any aspect of movement at all in front of the camera, that soon enough, it is easy to amalgamate many images. So I'm not going to draw attention to specific images that much, but for the presentation I just wanted to give a sense of the kinds of images that the camera produces, and the kinds of places that I chose to put the camera as an artist. And sometimes those decisions were very much based on the kind of time I had available to me, or it might have been determined about where the animals were. The cattle on the farm, and how do we describe or determine a farm animal, for instance. So I'm just going to quickly keep going through these without too much attention. And there's often, in many cases, situations where there are no photographs produced, or there's no movement produced, maybe, or nothing that, when you look into the photograph, you can't really see what might have generated the image. So I'm just going to keep, and some of these I have in the new Irish Work Show at the International Centre for the Image, and some of them are, clearly the camera has produced a lot of photographs, and at this moment in time, the project has 8,071 photographs. So as you can imagine, quite an editorial challenge per se. One of the things I noticed as well is that when I would go to put up the camera for the night, it would often, register what was in its path. And many times I would go back to the same kinds of places over and over again. So this kind of idea that, the places and spaces that are that the camera is placed are quite similar, and the kinds of photographs that are produced also have this kind of repetitive, glitchy manner. Here we can see a photograph of the side of an animal. This photograph is currently on show at the New Irish Works show. And this is a very short space of time. It's 4:47 in the morning to 4:48. So it's 1 minute. And it's you can imagine like how difficult it would be to kind of think about, well, what to do with the photographs. I suppose I spoke earlier about the fact that I myself was often in those photographs in a kind of in a manner which was unintended, but at the same time I chose to keep some of those photographs, not all of those photographs, and that's something I'll come back to later. And those kinds of decisions and I made around what to keep, what not to keep, and why, perhaps. I just want to bring attention to some of the things I spoke about earlier, this kind of text work that also informs this project. The text work when you go to make an artist statement about work, it can always be very challenging. People ask you, like, what is the work about? So I began to think about, well, what is the work about? Throughout 2023, 2024, and I began to make these put in first person, like what was the work about, and eventually decided that this particular piece of text, the original name for the project was A Perfect Plan, and it kind of set out what the project was going to do, what I was going to discover in the process, and the idea of like embracing disappointment if things don't work out. I've just noted there on the right-hand image, you'll see an image which says here, or a text piece which says here. And I used to print off this statement quite regularly when I would get nothing else done in relation to the project. I would print off the statement. I would try and make some small changes to that statement. Sometimes I would get caught up in other activities associated with everyday life, such as in this case, in the second image there, I'm like making an appointment, I'm making an arrangement to meet somebody. So there's lots of different versions of this statement, A Perfect Plan. So this is part of the work, quite a critical earlier phase of the work. I think I have about like 50 versions of this statement, and some of them have different font sizes, some of them have very small changes, some of them have notes, and I would leave them here. I would print off quite a few of them, and I would take them with me to various different places if I was, going to an appointment with my mom, or, just having it in the house. So any free time I would have, I might make an amendment to this text. And then this in some ways made me feel a bit better that I was doing something with my art practice. Just want to talk a little bit about, kind of that labor of every day, and how as a carer, there's only one kind of letter difference between a carer and career. And this idea that the labor of everyday life can often be undervalued, that labor can be undervalued, and it certainly oftentimes feels very much unseen. So I turned the camera also on like some things that were very close to the house and the activities that I used to do. And oftentimes, putting out the washing, I would leave the camera out, pointed towards the washing line. And I felt that the washing line was this kind of connection between the inside and the outside. So in the project, there are like 24 different washing lines. Some have like 5 images, some have hundreds of images. And you may, if you have seen the show at New Irish Works, be aware of this particular piece, which has, this particular piece has 56 photographs, and it comes from a kind of a night that the camera generated 286 images of this particular washing line. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the editing process. I'm not going to delay too much. So I've just made a few notes here, and this idea that the editing for this work has been like very kind of problematic, and I've been very troubled at times about like what to delete, what not to delete, what to keep. And this idea that the editing has actually become has still in ways has become a new thief of my time. So the kind of time that I was trying to get back is now being kind of sucked up by like trying to make decisions about what happens to the work. I also wanted to draw attention to the idea that this editing has raised, critical questions about how we manage large repository of images of this nature, and bring attention to the role photography can play in visualizing this often unseen labor of care. I cite the idea that there was a lot of similarities between my behavior and the camera's behavior, and I put together kind of various different editing recipes over a 1 year period about different ways I could possibly edit the work. And this was born out of frustration versus intention. And thinking, well, maybe I should just gather up all the photographs that are focused on security. And here you can see that this is kind of happening, but there's nothing actually happening in the photographs. Or maybe I should gather up, here again, another image set based on security, and all you can really see is a beautiful little, what looks like a robin, and a very nice cat. And also one of the kind of nuances of this camera was that it had a capacity to duplicate file numbers. So that also added to the kind of digital disarray associated with the kind of figuring out how to kind of take care of the work and look after it. And at a point I decided maybe it's best to just edit this work thinking about farm animals only. And then, like, what is a farm animal? How might that be determined? Like, where do flies and moths figure? What about stray cats? What about deer who are not on the animal register, who are not seen by the Department of Agriculture as animals per se? One other strategy that came to mind was I bought a kitchen timer, and I kind of borrowed those kind of organizational tools associated with the kind of domestic and bought that as a kind of editorial tool to the work. So, in particular, I was interested in this idea of memory. That was associated with, written on this timer, kitchen timer, and how, in many senses, the relationship between photography and memory, and the relationship between everyday tasks and memory, and how every day feels the same. And then, if every day feels the same, how might attention be brought to specific moments, or how do we remember? How do we remember with the photograph, and what is forgotten in that process? Nonetheless, I did try some other kinds of ideas around, choosing 10 similar images. I began to think about the limited time I had available in the studio. I would say, okay, I start this at 11:09, I finish at 11:10, and what kind of labor might be generated in that period of time? 1 minute. With the kitchen timer, I was able to choose 50 random photographs from this large repository of images. With that in mind, I want to speak now very briefly about the preparation and thinking for our New Irish Work Show, which in this folder, it says opened on May 3rd, and we all know that's not true. So it's actually opened on May 14th. Apologies, I will be changing this after the slideshow. What might have been the determinant? I've made some notes here about that. What determined what I showed in New Irish Works, and indeed, what kind of decisions I made. So I'm going to just read this very briefly. So for the presentation of Fox equals Cow, a selection of random photographs are chosen from a large repository and presented in combinations, sequences, and sets. In doing so, I was interested in ideas of care, to take my time, to draw attention to time, to moments that felt like they mattered. I wanted to reflect on certain images that had resonated with me, but also in doing so, I wanted to find a way to communicate the dual nature of my life, this kind of parallel universe, this mirroring positive, negative, everything operating in like kind of a dual nature. The idea of day and night, the idea of work and play, the idea of seen and unseen labor. You may remember earlier in the presentation I spoke about this statement that I used to carry around with me, which happened to be A4. And that A4 statement became also a kind of a vehicle in which I thought about the presentational methods. So universal paper ratios of A4, A3, A2, A5 serve as spaces where things are doubled up. And I kind of chose that to think about, again, to kind of reflect on that dual nature, that kind of duality, about other spaces, other times, about other lives being lived outside of what we see. So in many ways, also the presentational strategies try to echo the kind of non-linear ways in which the work was often produced and appraised, which I cite in my statement as in bits and pieces. I would come to the studio in fits and bursts, and regularly everything happened towards the end of the day. So I'm just going to quickly flick through a few of these photographs. I'm nearly coming to a close with my presentation. One of the things that felt important when I showed this work in the show was to note the time, the date, the file number, that kind of data that identifies these images. Another part of the project includes this text works. You can see here that this is how I presented them in the show. And these bits of text come from kind of everyday discourse. They kind of fall flat because they're not really finished, and they kind of hype you up, but then they kind of let you down, and they ask you to reflect on, well, what might the gaps be, and in ways they are or they could be cited as other kinds of photographs. Maybe they are relating to the images that you don't see. But many times, these texts relate to my everyday experiences. So you can imagine getting through all of this and making decisions about what to show was important in the show, and I chose to or made decisions to conceal some of the photographs and reveal some information, and I chose to use these kind of tubes as ways of thinking about that, as a kind of strategy to think about that. This image I had in the kitchen, as you can see from the switch on the wall, and oftentimes I used to kind of use that photograph as a way to perch other things. So the frame itself had a multi-purpose. So I borrowed those kinds of sensibilities in thinking about that text, some of those texts that I showed in the exhibition. So that's kind of it, really. And that's the presentation that I have. And so I come back to the beginning. And I just want to finish by acknowledging the support of New Irish Works and the panel who selected work. I want to thank the Arts Council for their funding, and I also want to draw attention to funding I received from Cork County Council, and all of these things are really very much appreciated, and that support acknowledged here this evening.
Thank you very much, Miriam. As you were talking, I was thinking about some. Well, I was thinking about your practice in general, and how somehow you managed to have fun while working super hard, both on the project and on the farm, um, and but also the maybe the parallelism with, in a weird way or in a clear way, with other projects that are around surveillance, perhaps, in very, very different ways, like The Pillar by Stephen Gill, or even Hayahisha Tomiyasu project on the table tennis. He's observing the table tennis from the tower where he lives, and from the tower he lives, yeah. And but also, Sophie Cahl's sort of like history of the detective, and that idea of on one hand, the obsession with the um, invigilation of the others, but also the accumulation of information. Maybe Sophie Cahl would have been acting somewhat very differently if she could have used digital cameras, or hidden cameras, or like the wildlife cameras are. But so I wonder, like, I don't know, how do you feel about on that sense, or whether you have thought about how do you connect with other artists and photographers that came before you, or that
Yeah,
are
I mean, I think
contemporary.
I suppose in terms of sorry, in terms of this work and the works being produced by thermal cameras, wildlife cameras, um, you know, this approach has been used by artists, many different artists, and I suppose most famous one we are aware of is like Stephen Gill's work around his Swedish countryside. Um, and in making this kind of work, you want to think, well, what can I bring to that kind of conversation around works that are this kind of way? So that's one thing. And indeed, in another way, of concern to me, in a broad sense, is like, well, what happens to all of the photographs
Mhm.
that are produced? Who takes care of them? Who has access to them? is it possible that other artists can have access to this repository of images and make work in response to it, or make work in response to this repository of images, this archive of images, collection of images? So this is my intention in thinking about like how is this work edited, and in accepting this very large figure of 8,071 photographs, I feel that you know um, in many ways they almost represent like um, units of labor that, and when you think about units of labor, you think about labor that's seen and labor that's unseen. And within an agriculture context, stocking units, and units are thought about in very different kinds of ways. So that resonates with me greatly, and I think this is how I kind of see this work within the kind of larger context of artists who kind of think about their own lives, pointing the camera through themselves or their own situations. But this is where my work is kind of sitting as it continues to develop through the wonderful platform of New Irish Works in the next year or two. So yeah, that's hopefully answers
So
some of the
there's
questions.
a direct connection there with the planning, the preparation, the harvest, the sorting, and the making sense of the produce, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um, Very well. I think we'll remind the attendants that they can share indeed questions both through the chat or through the Q&A tool. But we're gonna continue with Dorje, and we can gather all the questions perhaps at the end of his presentation. So Dorje, when you are ready.
For sure. I was actually just on that last note, Miriam. Is there
Mm.
something in in an increasingly surveilled and self-surveilled environment? Um, I don't know if this applies for the way you think about your work, but like reappropriating the technology of surveillance or the mechanics of surveillance. Like I'm thinking of Richard Moss's work where he's using the infrared cameras, or Trevor Paglen who uses the kind of military grade stuff.
Mm-hmm. I
Had
mean, I
that
suppose
kind
for
of
me, when I think about that kind of question or that kind of direction, um, this work is very much about kind of looking at the everyday
mm,
rituals, like the micro events, um, and it kind of brings attention to them
mm.
as in many cases where nothing really happens. Um,
Absolutely, yeah, yeah. And
and it also kind of subverts the intention of the agricultural map, which is about crunching numbers.
yeah,
Uh, Land that is kind of useful and land that is struck off because it's unuseful or not useful. Uh,
yeah. I think the
so,
strand of
like
labor as well is
that
so
kind of
interesting.
surveillance, that is that is um, part of the Department of Agriculture's intention, is very one-sided. Um,
Mm.
it doesn't really take into account feelings, I think.
As
Um,
regards to cartography.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
yeah, and any kind of inspection that might take place in a satellite fashion or or
Hmm.
an inspection in response to um, something that they might have seen or
Mm-hmm.
made aware of in a farm
Yeah,
maps. Farm maps, the Department of Agriculture, um, and my relationship to the map are very different, and we look
mm.
at the map very differently. We feel the map very differently.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
It's objective information gathering for them, right?
absolutely, yeah. Crunching numbers, objective, actually, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Faceless, nameless, similar to some of the themes, actually, Dorje, that you're about to discuss in your work as well, I think.
Well, yeah, yeah. In part,
Better let you go and
absolutely.
do that.
Okay, if I can sh figure out to share my screen one sec. So, yeah, full screen. Excellent. Yeah, my name's Dorje de Burgh. I'm Dublin born. I'm based in Berlin now since 2022. Uh, my practice is kind of reactive, I suppose, in the main. My first key body of work, much like Miriam's, was made caring for my mum in 2016, 2017, which I showed with Dear Angel and Julia in New Irish Works 2018, I think. And since that work, I kind of photograph what is in my life, like what's in front of me. So the themes kind of are varied, I suppose, are broad. And the work I'm here to talk about today is Now's the Time, is what it's called. And following October 7th, I've been in Berlin about a year. I was going to the Palestine protests kind of week in, week out. And at first, the police violence, I was perceiving it as a overzealous policing, but it was a very new thing to me, obviously coming from Ireland, where it's a much softer approach when you're dealing with the state. And slowly I started to realize that actually this was like a state-sanctioned position, obviously for loads of complex reasons. I mean, I obviously was previously aware of Germany's complex relationship with Israel, but wasn't quite aware to the degree with which the state had pivoted into alignment to the point of like ritualistic kind of repression and oppression and violence at every protest we were attending every week. Simultaneously to this, Una Mullally, who's a Dublin-based journalist, writer, artist, she was invited to perform at a fundraising gig for Gaza in Berlin, and she wrote on the fly a very beautiful long-form poem, which then we decided, this is the genesis of this work, I suppose what I'm getting at. We then decided to put my photos that I was only in the nascent stage of making at that point and her text together and produce a very cheap 32-page like zine and sell it to raise funds for Gaza Mutual Aid. So we did that fast. We launched it in New York, Dublin, and Berlin, and we sold a bunch. We made a couple of grand, I think, which yeah was a very nice kind of like gesture of solidarity, if nothing else. This is an excerpt from Una's beautiful writing, just to give you a sense of it. Beneath the dust that's falling, chalk dust, rubble film, flour bags pierced by snipers. Now is the time to find each other. With every child shaking shell-shocked, our bones quiver too. I know you feel it. The connection is in me, in us, in you. I put my hand inside chests, pump hearts at different beats to conjure a rhythm that heralds peace marches painted on their banners. Now is the time to find each other. So from the zine, it developed into a show, and I suppose to kind of backtrack a little bit, the other than feeling that what I was witnessing had some kind of importance or hinge moment potentially in our kind of journey, our societal journey. The second aspect was the matrix of surveillance that was happening at the protests. I'd never really attended protests in a regular form like that, week in, week out, and they take a certain kind of fascinating, yeah, ritualistic routine, and with three strata of excuse me. Oh, sorry. Sorry, Angel, I thought you said something. Yeah, three strata of surveillance. The cops are surveilling the protesters with closed circuit HD digicams, and then the protesters are filming the cops. And then there's people like me and people in their windows and kind of citizen journalists and all sorts of people on an outer ring filming, photographing the protesters and the cops. So it's kind of this extremely complex matrix of everyone filming, everyone photographing each other. Lots of photographers obviously making images of the protests in a kind of classic, you know, like a 35mm up close in getting the action, getting the decisive moment. So I decided, just on a kind of boring technical note, to use a 500mm telephoto lens on my Nikon, which was a kind of self-imposed restriction, just to make something that I was forced to look at things in a slightly different way. Camera with the 500mm on, it's very slow, it's fixed aperture, and you have to be miles away from the action, and you kind of need a load of light. So it kind of forces you to move away from things that are happening to things that aren't. And yeah, that's how it kind of developed. The launch of the zine in Berlin led to a solo show in a very cool artist-run space called Stations in Koppelser Tor in Kreuzberg. The interesting aspect of this was that the Stations Gallery is built into a very famous kind of social housing complex, and a police station had recently been inserted into it. Despite much pushback from the local community, it's the traditionally heart of traditional Kreuzberg, Turkish Kreuzberg, sorry. And we inserted the police station despite the community's kind of resistance. And Stations is 4 doors down from the police station. So as we were installing the show, we started getting kind of more attention and getting more noticed. And the gallerists who previously were very relaxed and very into the idea of showing the work in an explicitly pro-Palestine incarnation, kind of, and this is absolutely no shade on them. They're funded by the state, and funding from the state was being pulled all over the place at the time. And they were really freaked out about losing their funding for the following year, for 2026, for this year, which they eventually did, but not necessarily for these reasons. So we had to be kind of cautious as to what we showed. And we ended up covering up the windows to the gallery and kind of editing the work in such a way as to incorporate censorship into the work as best we kind of could. So to make the statement that we wanted to make, but also tread carefully. And for them, the key image was this black C-type, which kind of represented what couldn't be shown, which was, to my mind, this image. Where's it gone? This image, which we didn't show, we would then show later. So yeah, sadly they lost their funding anyway, despite our care. But I suppose, what was interesting about the process was it was the first time I think I'd encountered making work where you're extremely aware of it being kind of, I'm not saying dangerous to the state apparatus, but dangerous to the institution that you're working with, to a point where you're faced with the ethical, moral dilemma of saying what you want to say, but obviously not biting off your nose to spite your funding face, I suppose, is one way of putting it. So from there, it traveled to London, and this incarnation again was slightly different. It was a 2-person show with Brian Teeling, who's another brilliant Dublin artist, whose work is kind of explicitly around his queer identity, amongst many other things, hauntology, sci-fi. We both share a great love of J.G. Ballard and Philip K. Dick. And in fact, a Philip K. Dick book, The Man in the High Castle, was the kind of conceptual backbone for this show. The Man in the High Castle is the alternate history where the Nazis have won the Second World War and have colonized the USA. And it's, as is all Philip K. Dick's works, it's kind of bonkers. And there's a book within a book running through it, and myriad themes, but the key line is fascism, essentially. So that was kind of what we were trying to deal with in a somewhat obfuscated or oblique way. And obviously surveillance, once again, in Brian's work, plays a key role. And that's the end of London. And then we moved it to New Irish Works, 2026. And this, for me, was it was the fullest incarnation so far. It's an ongoing body of work, but the version that we put together in the International Centre for the Image incorporates both the censorship aspect, the kind of self-censorship, the dystopian sci-fi to a certain degree, and then the broadening out, which is the final phase of the project, which is what I'm currently working on, which is kind of making something, I hope, that speaks to the situation in Germany on a much, much broader scale. I'm not photographing the protests really anymore. I'm going to use the images that I have as the fulcrum for the work, and including images such as this, a lot of Mercedes, and yeah, lots of bits and pieces of Berlin. Yeah, the idea being to speak in a broader sense to the shift that's happening here, which was not something I expected when I moved, which is, yeah, it's fascinating and scary, and very much tied in with an oppressive state apparatus and the surveillance state, which is coming into full effect. Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. I was in reading and thinking about this talk, I came across two pieces recently, which was kind of interesting. I want to bounce back to Miriam maybe, and we can delve into ideas around surveillance a little bit deeper. The two things I came across was Gideon Jacobs, who's an American writer. He used to work for Magnum, a young guy, but very, very sharp photographic writer, works a lot with Spike magazine here in Berlin. And the other was a talk by Mark Leckey, the Mancunian artist legend who made the famous piece Fiorucci Maybe Hardcore. And his practice increasingly is like talk based. He gives these kind of fascinating lectures. But the thing that struck me was both Gideon and Mark Leckey in very quick succession. The article and the talk were a week apart. They both began with going right back to Adam and Eve, to the fall. And the reason they were using that as an illustration is that they were talking about the self, the whole self, before the splitting of the image, before the self-image, before temptation, and before Adam and Eve see themselves as image and become embarrassed of their nakedness. And this is also paralleled in like the Lacanian mirror phase, where obviously your sorry, I'm looking for your selfhood, your subjectivity is the word, is defined by realizing that you have an image. And where they were both going with this kind of splitting motif, I suppose, is the advent of AI and AI surveillance and AI image making. Gideon's take on potential for where we're at as regards this new episteme where the image no longer is attached to its referent at all. You know, like I'm an analog photographer, that's the way I work. And in terms of this project, it was very deliberate, making something slow, making something hand printed, making something in the darkroom as something of a point of resistance to this like mass of dematerialized data that was being generated by all the various machines at each protest. But as we move into this new mode where our trust in the image's indexicality is kind of shorn forever now, I think. Gideon definitely seems to be making that case. His hope or his positive spin or his aspirational hope is that it will free us to return to images in a very pure way, no longer shorn of their truth-telling relationship in the world. Mark Leckey's take on the situation was way more pessimistic, and basically his resolution was that he's just completely lost and he doesn't know what it means to be an image maker in this new world. So I suppose, yeah, like that's kind of me wrapping up and opening it out to maybe discuss. I'm just interested in what this shift means as image makers and as people operating in an increasingly surveilled society, where simultaneously the image's indexicality is no longer trustworthy to any degree. It seems to open up all sorts of strange ontological spaces, both as makers and as people.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I suppose just in response to am I on mute or not? I suppose the conceptual kind of frameworks in which our works are produced, you are working in an analog context, and I am working in a digital remote context, like surveying myself. surveying the farm in a different kind of way.
Hmm.
And for me, like one of the intentions with this work is very much around, like preserving this work, and kind of moving it away from the cold digital state in which it was
Hmm.
produced towards something tangible, towards
Hmm.
something that you can touch, you can feel, you can hold. Um, and yeah, so there are some kind of parallels there, almost like working in opposite ways, like, in terms of production.
No,
Um,
absolutely. But I also think with your work, there's loads of subversions going on. But like, the CCTV image, which your images uh reference, I mean, I think they're much more beautiful than your standard CCTV stills grab or whatever, obviously. But they definitely reference that language. But they have
mhm.
such a softness and such a playfulness to them. I think there's a
Yeah,
real subversion of yeah. Um,
like that might be the case for sure. Like they certainly have a certain aesthetic and a different kind of intention, I suppose. But there's also kind of like editorial kind of decisions at play in terms of what gets seen and what gets
of course.
concealed. Very much like the kind of mapping systems in the first place. The kind of questions I had at the beginning. Um, yeah, and I suppose one of the things that I, felt that there were some parallels to be drawn between the kinds of things we were discussing is around kind of that, you know, kind of looking into the kind of the mapping systems in different kinds of ways. And I
Mhm.
know that your work is very much around territory and
Mhm.
advocating for those who have been, where territory is compromised. So yeah, I think there are some
Yeah,
very, um, nice connections there. Um,
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting, I struggle with the like I don't know the idea of the work. Obviously, the booklet myself and Una made was very much a direct thing to make money. But yeah, it's I mean I wouldn't have made I've never made something so explicitly, I suppose, political or politicized. Um, and it opens up strange spaces, strange questions. I mean, the London show, for instance, was a commercial gallery, and it suddenly
mhm.
felt kind of different moving into this space from like an artist-run space in a very much like grounded in the community in Berlin to suddenly the work is then transposed onto the wall of this kind of blue chip situation in London. And it's kind of now it was more the cop images that were used deliberately for that reason because it felt strange to take these yeah images of protesters who are doing something they really believe in, and as you say about a really serious situation that is obviously ongoing, and then turning it into this fetish object to be sold felt quite strange.
Actually,
So
one of
yeah,
the questions, I might, if I could bring, if you may or may not be able to answer this, and it's totally fine if you can't. But you know, I know that I struggled quite a lot with the kind of strategies of presentation, and you do think about fetishizing the image and framing it and making it
mhm.
into something beautiful when perhaps that might there's a certain kind of language associated with the framed image and a certain kind of relationship. And maybe have you any kind of thoughts around that?
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
no,
you
absolutely. I
know,
mean, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I did think about it. I mean, the Berlin show, I framed them all in like off the peg frames, from a shop that I just bought real cheap. And that was kind of deliberate. But conceptually, the follow through is not quite there because I'm also making these really like particular handprints. So like to say I'm disavowing the fetish object would not be absolutely true, but there was certainly a degree of it pursue via the framing technique at least. But then, also we're photographers and you want to make the photograph beautiful. So I don't know. I don't know what the answer is there. There's always going to be a degree of fetishization.
yeah, I
But
mean,
there was a very clear, sorry, Miriam,
no,
there was
no,
a very clear attempt there both on making absolutely amazing images, and those color. I mean, I think we haven't seen color prints like those in a while, quite frankly, and then to present them on a way that somewhat also takes part of that sort of like um, what's the word, like fetishization, I
Yeah.
guess, of from it. But certainly the works that are presented, and the strategies that are used are geared towards that idea that these are both images in transit, perhaps in the way that Austin Hearn.
Absolutely, yeah, yeah, yeah. You're absolutely right in terms of the constellation aspect and the kind of non-hierarchical approach was very much to slightly disrupt
Hmm.
the fertilization. Although they're glossy C type, so they're just like real sexy and beautiful. You can't do much about it.
I guess in many senses too. I'm just kind of adding to that it is um, it is unusual in some senses that photographs or protesters are treated in that kind of way. They usually find themselves in like kind of newspaper contexts or kind of
Yeah, reportage kind of.
harsh
Yeah,
context. So to treat them in this particular way is a decision also.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and I think um, the it's actually part of that narrative. It could become
yeah.
part of that narrative.
And similarly with the cops, I didn't want it to be absolutely obviously the protesters' faces are obscured, and that's a genuine legal thing because certainly for the Germany show, protesters get identified and get in trouble with the police. So I wouldn't represent them without obscuring their faces. The cops are shown in the main. I didn't want it to be some kind of black and white thing. I wanted there to be some modicum of the humanity of the Polizei, even though it's a compromised one. And like the large works they're all called The Tragedy of the Class Traitor, 1, 2, and 3, I think. Uh, because that is kind of essentially what's happening. But it doesn't disavow their humanity, you know.
And there is that data that you have collected, I suppose, talking about the connection with Miriam. Um, there are some animals there. You have a few, or a constant on the sensitive some types, I suppose, like the Mercedes. Maybe you mentioned the Mercedes, uh, but there was an intention why that particular animal is there, right?
Which animal?
Well, I call it animal, sorry, but because I'm trying to draw a parallel with Miriam, but I suppose
Ah,
the actual car.
oh, the car. Oh yeah, the Mercedes. Well, I mean that particular Mercedes E-Class was my mum's last car before she died. She bought it for like 200 quid and it lasted about 5 months, but I loved it. Big old white Mercedes E-Class 1989. And I was photographing them just when I saw them because I'm kind of interested in them. And somehow, I mean, I don't know, it sounds so pat when you kind of explain it, but Germany is in decline. It's an industrial decline, and fascism is on the rise. And those two things have a big historical precedent here. The Germans don't respond well to economic decline. Part of what's happening is the car industry is collapsing for various reasons, and somehow the Mercs, for me anyway, I hope it doesn't seem real obvious now and awful and pat now that I've said it, but the Mercs kind of represented that strand of what's happening, ostensibly, as the culture swings towards the intolerant and right wing. And I mean, everyone here is afraid of the AfD getting into power, which is pretty terrifying. They're leading in most polls at the moment, except Berlin, but only marginally. Like where I am now, there's AfD flags on the street, just outside Berlin. I'm 2 hours outside Berlin. Um, but the current government are doing a pretty good job of being kind of totally fascistic. So I don't know what's like it can obviously get worse, but they're doing a pretty good job. I mean, they just implemented AI surveillance all across my neighborhood, Kreuzberg, Neukölln, which,
Wow.
as far as I understand, goes against the German constitution. You know, they're doing all sorts of illegal things at the borders. Like if you drive out to Austria or any direction on the border, there's like loads of German police checking everyone coming in, which is against all the Schengen zone rules, like the laws, the EU laws. What else is happening that's totally bonkers? But they banned Irish for a while, and they banned Arabic for a while. At the protests, that was. You can't wear a watermelon, it's a hate symbol. You can't wear a red triangle, it's a hate symbol. And there's a website called the Archive of Silence, if anyone is interested, which just catalogs all the cancellations and job losses and exhibition pulling and prizes and all the cultural, mainly cultural sector stuff that's that's come down on people as a result of basically criticizing Israel, which is also now they just passed a law um, which denying Israel's right to exist is a criminal offense, which is kind of insane because obviously in like international law, no state has a right to exist. It's not written anywhere that that's actually a thing. So yeah, it's all gone a bit strange and a bit Orwellian here. Um, and the historical precedents obviously uh, give one pause, so to speak. Sorry, that's a long answer to ask me why was there a Mercedes in the show.
No, I just remember when we were installing the show, you mentioned the it as a symbol. I thought it was very interesting. But there is that idea of I mean, again, because it's presented a number of times, um, somehow there is an investigation around that icon, I suppose, and
Yes.
what it means, and I suppose in that sense, with this animals that some animals are part of the farm, some animals are not part of the farm, but certainly it's hard to tell, and you have to review them all. I don't know. It's a very it's a very interesting connection with the surveillance in Miriam's work, and that sort of
Like it's, it has a different kind of agenda. Like, you know, farm map is a very complex space. More and more, the mapping determines livelihood, actually, in terms of the kinds of finances you can garner from farming.
Mm.
Small farming is very challenging. Um, so there are lots of things to think about there. And like who's making the decisions, um, what is the kind of intention of the decisions that have been made. Um, I have a lot of stories. Sad story is about our farm map and different kinds of land that has been deemed, struck off the map. Um, in one instance, we had an inspection and we had a 100% fine for overclaiming on land. And in fact, the inspector noted that the garden in the farm would have to become part of the farm map because we had overclaimed so much that now the space of leisure had to become a space of labor or different kind of labor. So
Mm.
maps are very kind of
Well,
curious.
yeah, maps are power. Like maps are the state apparatus. That's why Great Britain is at the center of every world map we look at growing up, you know. Um, yeah, the languages of power. I mean, yeah, it's interesting when I started making these pictures of the protests, it wasn't power that I was thinking of. It was I don't know, history or something. It just felt like something that I needed to photograph where I was there, and it felt like some kind of important thing was happening, and I believe it is or was or is continuing to be. Um, but as it's progressed, the work is definitely about power, and I see that in yours as well. Not to be drawing comparisons all over the place, but certainly in terms of uh, as you say, the reclaiming of the map that is an
Well, it's
expression of
kind of
state power on you as a farmer and as a worker and as a carer and as someone who labors and
or yeah, as a carer, or what does labor look like, and how might it be accounted for, um, and what does that look like, and what role photography.
the visibility of it. Yeah.
Many of those photographs, many of those narratives that belong to the camera, or that the camera generated, they're very glitchy. They don't have any specific beginning, they don't have any definitive end, um, and um, they feel very much as kind of things that have a lot of there's a lot of things to unpack in the
Mm.
kinds of narratives that the camera attempts to generate, and of course, and in particular with this camera, and I chose only to use one camera.
Mm.
It chooses to show you something in a particular direction, um, but all of the action could be happening over there.
Yeah.
So also, like my account of things is also very biased, in terms of the places I chose to put the camera and the kinds of
Yeah.
editorial decisions I am making. But I'm just responding there to Austin's comment in the chat about, it's safe to say the photographic landscape that we are working in today is overwhelming. That is true, Austin, no question about it. And we spoke about like AI and the kinds of like uh, complexities and anxiety that prevails
Mm.
around AI in every kind of facet.
Absolutely. Yeah. Every facet of it. Yeah. Yeah.
But,
Um,
one of the themes, I think one of the things I can, that I'm thinking about at least, and I think you commented on, Dorje, is ideas of kind of resistance, um, and kind of making resistance and kind of taking ownership,
yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and making decisions that feel intentional, and have a resonance. And for me, for instance, with the work that I'm making, um, I'm very, I'm being very, um, I'm being very honest and open about the kind of editorial complexities associated with this work, what kinds of things have been omitted, what kinds of things we see, and what kind of opportunities there are for others to engage with this
Mm.
photographic archive.
Mm.
So, in many senses, I want to kind of animate this map in different kinds of ways. Um, I A number of years ago, I mentioned the farm inspection that we got, and the manner in which some of the land was struck off. It was
Mm.
struck off our map. It was struck off the financial kind of aspect that
Wait,
we've
does
been
that
paying.
mean you don't own that land anymore?
We do own it, but it's no longer cited or seen as land that's viable. It's
Okay.
like been
Okay.
like struck off the Catholic Church or something,
All right.
but it's still there. It hasn't gone away.
Well,
But
yes.
because it was struck off, it became a site of interest for me, actually, and I chose
Totally. So
to
it just
sort of take.
becomes what, like unusable land that you're not allowed
Yeah, it's kind of rough,
farm.
rough, rough scrub,
And
scrub.
what's the sorry, we're getting into the weeds of farm laws here, but I'm curious. What's their determination that like you've got too much land, you got it's
So,
not
like that the land isn't being grazed correctly. On
okay.
one level, you can claim for certain land that is good for habitats, and you turn the corner, and somebody else comes into the room. They say, "Oh no, we're not doing that scheme anymore."
Right.
That's not actually a scheme anymore. So that land that may have um, got some finances and support from previously
I
in a
see.
new scheme would be completely differently. Um, but the land that was struck off in our farm became a source of interest for me, in a way that it hadn't been previously.
Mm.
And I chose to kind of really make lots of investigations, actually with the support of the Visual Artists Ireland Experiment Award. I began some research, and I have developed another, you know, body or piece of work around it, around a rambling rosebush, which I found in this space. And I spent the last number of years propagating, and it now prevails, much like George Orwell's roses at the side of my studio. So watch the space. Yeah, and it really is about kind of animating the map in different kinds of ways, having this kind of resistance to the digital sphere in which we are all participants in and to. And yeah, so that's the kind of perhaps maybe one of the
Would it be fair to say, that Fox Cow is about your mum a little bit in her absence, in that like the strategies were developed partially because of the role you now take?
Absolutely, yeah.
So I think it's quite beautiful. Like it's a kind of beautiful absent representation.
Yeah, it's about that. It's about the kind of labor of care. It's about the care of labor, actually, both of those kinds of things. And it's about, the term itself or the title itself comes from the manner in which this camera, equals everything into nothing. Landscapes are the same as people, as the same as cats, as the same as rocks, as the same as trees. Everything is the same. And in fact, thinks about ideas of the unit, units of information that we associate with agricultural life and we associate with farming. And it kind of gathers all this information into something that's a little bit slightly bizarre, and thinks about, stocking units, farming units, and actually images as units.
Definitely, it's bits of data. Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
Banks and stock photography agencies that operate on the kind of basis of good photographs.
Just back to kind of what Austin was saying, and also the twin things I was referencing about Mark Leckey and Gideon Jacobs and their two takes on kind of the contemporary image sphere and the new episteme of dematerialization, plus this new like schism from image reference, indexicality gone, no longer. I remember a conversation at the advent of the smartphone with Samuel Kanan, and we were talking about like now that everyone is so visually literate and so semiotically literate, like what does that mean to be someone who like takes photographs for like a living or whatever, or as their vocation or their practice, because everyone does it. Does it diminish what you do, or does it load it? Is the fact that everyone is doing this practice and is so much more visually literate than they were before, does it actually give like attacking the medium and attacking the process with great thought and complexity like even more charge? And I think the same can be said for now, as we're kind of swimming in this kind of crazy situation of just vast amounts of image production, making images the way we all do. I feel is kind of more important than ever. And it's just interesting. I'm doing it real slow, and in this particular project you're doing it kind of fast and volume. Like you're generating these vast volumes of images, which I think is a really interesting
I suppose with
distance.
With this work, I've got to the stage where production, a bit like yourself, you said you're not taking photographs of the process anymore. I'm not putting the camera out anymore. I'm not generating any further photographs because I feel I have enough material to work with. In the way that I began the project in an abrupt manner, I've also finished it in an abrupt manner, much like the activities of everyday life where you're constantly disrupted. So let's start with abrupt and finish abruptly.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, what is particularly important with this particular amount of images, they may have been produced in a cold, digital, swift fashion, but now is the time. Now is the time to think about all the kinds of themes that this work addresses, and slow everything down and think about what has this camera done and what have I done in the creation of this work. And indeed, in fact,
I think that all the time.
What are the potentials and possibilities for this work to become animated in different ways by other people and not necessarily me? And if so, let's say similar to Belfast Exposed Archive, or different kinds of archives that become open and active for others to engage with. So rather than speeding up the process, I am now slowing things down dramatically. And in fact, truth be told, this slowing down manner is very important to me, because I like many of the people here who've attended the talk. I have other things to do also, and I have other responsibilities, and I physically can't always spend all of the time making the work, but I do have the time to think about what has happened. And I think the show New Irish Works gave me the opportunity to really start that process. It did begin earlier in 2024 when I showed 6 photographs in visual in a show called Behind the Curtain, curated by Ben Stafford. And that process began then. This New Irish Work show has given me the time and space to really start to think about, well, what are the possibilities with this work? And what are the possibilities, and how can the themes that the work address be unfurled in different kinds of ways as the project progresses and develops in the next one.
Well, I hope I'm not in trouble with Angel and Julia, because I've just given up on photographing miserable fascist Germany, and I'm just photographing flowers because I couldn't be looking at the cops anymore. I just couldn't be looking at them in the dark room. Sick of it.
I'm growing flowers, and you're photographing flowers.
I'm photographing flowers. Yeah, that's what I'm doing at the moment. But I'll go back to Germany soon for New Irish Works, developing the project. Don't worry.
I think it's not about us anyway, but I think it's a nice switch. Certainly, a bit more
Big time.
refreshing and exciting. I think perhaps maybe we can share maybe some final thoughts and some final questions in relation to both of your practices. To end the conversation, we could be here for much longer, I know. But I would like to maybe to ask Miriam, do you actually really desire to actually have somebody working on your personal work, like, I mean, on your person, on that particular archive, on this body of work with you? I mean, will you be open to that level of collaboration with somebody?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, actually, one of the things that I did explore, and I had to make decisions around what I chose not to show in this presentation, was experimenting, actually, truth be told, with AI as an editing tool, in fact, with programs like Aftershoot. But I chose in the very end not to use these kinds of programs, because I felt that there was something so faceless and nameless about that activity, and that already the camera had produced photographs in this kind of way. So I wanted to kind of resist that process. But the idea that other artists or other cultural institutions might have a specific agenda or intention with this work is something that is very much, I think, animates this work beyond just how the kinds of choices that I'm making around it. But I did put together a list of questions. God, where are they? I don't know. They're in an archive here somewhere, of the kinds of questions that might, if I was to get other individuals to edit this work, what kinds of determinants might, what might be the determinants of that, and what could possibly go wrong. Oh
Mhm.
no. But yeah. And actually, I'm going to say like this as an example that the presentation in New Irish Works that I'm currently showing. I'm One of the things that I have kind of resigned myself to the fact with this work is there's nothing wrong in it, actually. And in fact, it celebrates work that is like not totally finished. It advocates for it in this instance. Um, it mirrors the idea that one's work as a carer and as a farmer is often interrupted, and that we are often multitasking.
I
Uh,
never finished.
yeah, and never ending. So I think this has helped me greatly to sustain my art practice, and to accept that while what I have produced might not be necessarily completely right, it's our
Mm.
way. It's not the only way. And that's why the idea that others could have an insight into this archive um, kind of feels like another way of thinking about this work. Um, yeah, but so I feel that this is a really much like Austin's work actually, and slabs, which we spoke about last week.
Yeah,
This
yeah.
idea of practices that are enduring and
Yeah, ever
practices
growing, ever changing.
projects,
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, yeah,
projects
I
that are
feel
projects
exactly
that
the
are
same.
enduring and projects that while the photographs might have been produced in a very swift fashion, 3 images every 1 second, um, I would like to think that this project and the kinds of things that it represents have capacity to be unfurled and thought about, not only by me but by others into the future. Yeah.
Fantastic. And Dorje, maybe interesting too. You mentioned the new work or this focus on the flowers. Is this a
Oh, the
continuation of the
flowers
work?
is flowers is kind of a sidebar just to amuse myself because I was getting so sick of kind of living in this dark space constantly. I just happened to see a very beautiful Peter Hujar show not too long ago, which was just so extraordinarily touching for its kind of simplicity and humanity and very simple subjects. So it was really the flowers are just something that I think I'm going to make them into a book with another artist is the hope. But in terms of the broader now is the time, or maybe a different title as it expands. The next phase is I'm shooting loads of 5:4 large format portraits. Kind of August Sander, kind of vaguely in the back of my mind, typology somewhat, and then see do they add or can they be added as like another strata to the existing protests, Germany, and then something more formal, and just to see if it works. And yeah, I'm also always kind of photographing all the incidental stuff as ever. But the idea is to grow it, yeah, for a couple more years, I would imagine.
Okay,
But
and we'll hope to see it grow and to find ways to support it. And I have to thank you, Dorje and Miriam, for your
thank you,
time
and
today.
thank you, Julia.
And thank you for all the participants, all the attendees, and those who watch this video later once it's posted online. There is a note there on the chat in relation to the talks coming up. The next one is on Place and Territory with Billy Kenrick and Gary Laughlin. That's next Wednesday, 29th of July at 6 p.m. Also online. And it will be followed by a talk at the International Center for the Image with Kate Nolan and David Castro. Thank you very much, everybody, and we'll see you everywhere.